Welcome to Kevin Deal Photography, where I take you on my journey through photography. On today's episode, I'm going to be doing a review of the Canon RF70-200 2.8 USM IS. I wanted to give a special thanks to the Camera Exchange for sponsoring today's episode and providing the 70-200 for today's review. The 70-200 2.8. This is a legendary lens that's found in the bags of so many photographers. It's fast, accurate, optically superior, it's versatile. The 2.8 lets in so much light. And now with the RF version, it's shorter and lighter. I wanted to start off today's episode showing you a slideshow of some shots I took in the studio with Tatum and Jesse. Welcome to today's episode. If you're not familiar with Kevin Deal Photography, I do gear reviews, tips, techniques, and tutorials, and then sometimes I dive into film. If any of that sounds appealing to you, click the subscribe button below. And now let's get on to the review. The 70-200 2.8 is an industry standard portrait zoom lens. If you're not familiar, maybe you've been living under a rock. It is one of the most popular zoom lenses you can buy. It's really versatile. You can use it for portraits, events like weddings. You can use it for sports photography and really cool things like photojournalism. The ability to go from 70 and all the way to 200 millimeters and stay at a constant wide aperture of 2.8 is a really powerful tool. Whether you're into subject isolation, bokeh, however you want to pronounce it, whether you are into low lighting, this lens is going to get a lot of those jobs done. A lot of you are used to using a lens that is about a third longer than this. That's the typical 70-200 that you've grown up with. This is a redesign. This is a new design. Two very cool, new, unique things about this design. One, I already mentioned, it's smaller, but it's an entire pound lighter than the previous version of the 70-200 2.8. That's pretty impressive. You know, for some people, you could get this lens right here and something like a 28-70 f2, and this could be your entire bag. All those specs sound awesome on paper, but let's see how the 70-200 does out in the field. I'm down here in Austin, Texas, downtown. Jenna's coming in from out of town. She booked a session with me. So I'm gonna put this 2.8 through its paces, the 70-200. I know I've been resistant to change. I sold off my last 70-200. I just wasn't using it, but it was an F4, and I do love my bokeh. So I'm gonna see if maybe I was wrong. I'm gonna approach this with an open mind, and let's see what kind of shots we can get in today's session. While I waited for Jenna to arrive, I was just chilling out on the street. I decided to test out the USM motor on my R5. Happy to report, and of course this is of no surprise, it was lightning fast. I also tried it on my R7, and it was also lightning fast. So you saw how the 70-200 performed in the studio at the beginning of this episode. I wanted to do a more chaotic, uncontrolled environmental portrait session with the sun being backlit,
the light being less in my control, Jenna did a fantastic job. She helped me test the zoom range. I was very impressed with the way it worked in backlit situations, like you can see right here. And I also did some handheld video with it. I thought it did pretty good at 120 frames per second. The important thing is that it was in the neighborhood of some prime lenses. It wasn't as sharp as the RF prime lenses, but overall for a zoom, it did a fantastic job.
Me personally, I do not own a 70-200 of any kind. I used to own a 70-200 f4. It's not really a range I use. Yes, I'm a portrait photographer, so let me explain. I don't use a 70-200 2.8 because I own the 85mm 1.2. I own a 135mm f2. And if I really need something in between those, something that actually is also at 2.8, I have a 100mm 2.8 macro, which by the way, you can use for portraits. You just need to learn how to use the switch on the side of it so you don't get into a really long focus sweep. But it is actually a fast portrait lens that you can use. Speaking of switches, I know a lot of you buy these lenses and then you never bother to learn what any of these do. So let me briefly go over what they do. What you see right here, when you see full to 2.5 meters, that switch is not an unimportant switch. It's an important switch. So if you never used this switch and you're just like, yeah, I don't really know what that does, you're actually doing yourself an incredible disservice. So when it's in full, that means that it'll go to the minimum focusing distance, which is 0.7 meters, which is about 2.3 feet, and it'll start there. And then it'll sweep to try to find what you're trying to focus on. If you want to get there faster, if the subject is more than 8.2 feet away, let's just round up the subject's like longer than 10 feet away. You switch this, the 2.5 meters, to infinity. And when you have it there, it will more quickly acquire focus. AF, MF, I'm gonna give you all a free pass there. I'm pretty sure most of you know what that is, but that's just your autofocus to manual focus switch. Stabilizer, on and off. That's what that does. Another switch a lot of you don't learn is your stabilizer modes 1, 2, and 3. These are important to learn. Of course, you can consult your manual. I always leave it in stabilizer mode number 1 because it corrects vibrations in all directions. That seems to be best for what I do for portrait shoots. Mode number 2 is for panning left to right, panning up and down. It does corrections at right angles. So if you're following maybe somebody on a bike or something like that, mode number 2 would be a really good mode to try. Mode number 3 is very similar to mode number 2, except the difference is it only does it during exposure. This would be good for irregularly moving objects, things where you have to like react quickly. I don't use modes 2 and 3 like ever. I don't really shoot that style. I typically will just leave it in mode number 1, but that's something that you should know.
So I'm here in downtown Dallas. I'm going to test out my 70-200. We're going to be testing it out for surveillance and street photography. I want to try to take pictures of people who don't know I'm taking pictures of them from a distance, a safe distance. It is about time everybody's letting out of work. I can test it with my R7, which is what it's attached to right now. And then I'll also attach it to my R5, which is what I'm recording with right now. So let's see what kind of shots we can get here in downtown Dallas. It's cloudy, it's rainy, so we're gonna test out the weather sealing. The R7, which is what it's attached to, will be a crop sensor, so that'll get me a little closer. When I'm at 200mm, it gets me at like 350, somewhere in there. And so I'll test that out. And then, you know, the 2.8 aperture, with it being cloudy and the fact that the sun will be going down in a little bit, will also test out our low light performance.
I went to AT&T Plaza, tested out the 70-200, taking pictures of statues, patrons walking by, just people walking by, architecture. I thought I did a pretty good job there. The 70-200 zoom range was really helpful because there were things that were far away, there were things that were close up, so that zoom range once again proves to be invaluable. I also did some photojournalistic stuff. I wanted to test out how it performed in situations where I use slower shutter speeds. So you see this weird eye on Main Street in Dallas. I wanted to get the cars whizzing by and then have them be blurry with a sharp subject and focus. It seemed to do a great job, as you can see right here. I also did a little bit of photojournalism, documenting some of the sadder parts of life. That's just something that I like to do. I didn't want to show this person's identity. I did think that this was a powerful shot, and I think that this gets the point across without identifying who they are. I think it did a great job performing in the light. I put it in auto ISO mode. I personally don't care about grain. I think that it looks good up to 6400 or noise, whatever you want to identify that as. I came up on film, so I'm more concerned about freezing action or slowing down action. So I pretty much focused on shutter speed here and aperture and let the ISO do its thing. I think that the 70-200 did an incredible job. I can see why it would be great for street photography outside of the fact that it's a little heavier. And then for photojournalism, there's a reason why this is on the camera bodies of so many photojournalists out there in the world. And the new one takes that further. I can see this being on many cameras for many years to come.
All right, so I've shown you in the studio and out in an environment how the 70-200 works on portraits. I've shown you a little bit of street photography, photojournalism, surveillance photography with it. But I haven't shown you event photography, which is one of the primary things people buy this lens for. I don't have any weddings coming up. I am doing an event here in Central Texas for the Texas Forts Trails. So it's a historical commission in the state of Texas. It's about this mission, this fort I'm in, the Presidio de San Saba, which is located here in Central Texas, pretty much the geographic center of Texas, Menard, Texas. And if you're not familiar, Texas has had 6 flags over it: Spain, France, Mexico, the independent state of Texas, the Confederacy, and now, of course, the United States of America. And in that process, they also ran into the Comanche, who lived here first. And so there's a lot of history behind it. This is one of the forts when the Spanish were expanding northward. And so we're going to cover this event. We're going to take some pictures of some arts and crafts, some reenactors, and then the mission itself.
So, just like water being wet, as you can see right here, the 70-200 2.8 does an incredible job at events. It gives you a very usable zoom range as well as incredible subject isolation, but the fact that it goes to 2.8, it's fast, it's accurate, it's sharp, and it's the reason why it'll be the preferred choice for event photographers, and you'll see it on their camera bodies for many years to come. Those are all shots on the R5, which is full frame. Let's see what some of the shots look like on the R7, which is a 1.6 crop. So let's take a moment to discuss who I'd recommend this lens for. If you own the most modern EF 70-200 2.8, which I believe is the Mark III, if you own the most modern Sigma and Tamron 70-200 2.8 lenses, if you're just looking at an image quality upgrade, I really don't think with the price tag that this carries that you're going to be like blown away. This lens is $27.99, so after taxes, it's basically $3,000 US. You can get the Sigma one for half that price, the Tamron one for half that price, and the image quality is really close. The Mark III version of this is really close, the EF version. So I don't really think image quality is where you're going to see the huge upgrade. For those people, the only reason I would upgrade to this is if you want to make your bag smaller and you want to make your bag lighter, and then maybe to a lesser extent, you want to take advantage of the new RF mount and things like the control ring, which this has, which I typically will set to my autofocus area. So if those reasons are reasons that you'd want to upgrade and $27.99 isn't a big deal to you, I would recommend you get this lens.
Okay, so here's two files right here. The one on the left was shot with a Tamron 70-200 2.8, and the one on the right was shot with a Canon RF70-200 2.8. I did not take either of these shots. These are the work of a friend of mine, Chris Woodman, out of Somerset in the UK. He's an incredibly talented portrait photographer, and these are his images. I actually like to use other people's images sometimes, and of course I use these with permission, but I like to use other people's images so you can see what other people do with this equipment as well, not just myself. So when I look at these two images, I do prefer the one on the right, the RF 70-200 2.8. I feel like it's a little bit more three-dimensional. Now, some of that is the way the lighting is hitting him and where the sun is and where the shadows are cast, but I do feel that it has a little bit more three-dimensional of a look on the right. I really like that bokeh, and I like the color reproduction. As you can see, I haven't adjusted anything. These are RAWs straight out of camera. So there's no sliders moved. The only thing really that you can see that's been messed with in camera is your white balance. One's at 54, one's at 52. But that's just an auto white balance setting most likely that Chris was using. So when I look at these files, I do gravitate toward the one on the right. I feel it's a little bit more three-dimensional. I like the color reproduction a little bit better. I like the bokeh. It feels like it's a little closer to a processed file, but you may not want a lens with so much character. You may want something that's a little bit more surgical. And I think the Tamron has a little bit more surgical of a look. You do have to do a little bit more post-production work to it, like bump the contrast up and things like that. But you can kind of get it to look like the Canon if you do a little bit of work in post. So that's just my opinion of how this lens worked on somebody else's work that isn't even my work and how it's rendering these images. And I think this is kind of cool because I'm not being biased. I'm just looking at this stuff surgically now instead of being personally attached to it like I get to with my work. For me, I prefer the look of the Canon. I think that it's closer to my final image. I prefer lenses with character, which is, in my opinion, what it has. And once again, I haven't messed with anything on this yet. If I start kind of messing with the Canon shot, though, I think I can get a little closer to what I want. I do find also that when you take this stuff and you put it into like black and white, it's a little less noticeable. Once you start taking color information out of it, I find that they are even closer to my eyes. There's no right or wrong answer here as to which lens is better. It's which you prefer. But I will tell you that the one on the left costs about 3 times less than the one on the right. So if it's your bread and butter lens, the one on the right is probably a good way to go. But if you're on a budget, and I may find myself one day needing a 70-200 2.8, I may actually opt for the one on the left, even though I prefer the one on the right because it costs 3 times more. But Chris Woodman is an incredibly talented photographer. I'm going to leave a link in the description below so you can check out more of his work, and his Instagram is down below. Now, maybe if you're a landscape photographer or something like that, I'd actually look into the F4 version of this lens. Some of you who may want to, save $1,000, you may find that the F4 is just fine for you. I personally used F4 versions of the predecessor, the EF, for my portrait sessions because I found anything beyond 135, even at F4, had really pleasing bokeh. Now, if you're in super low lighting situations, that's where the extra stop of light will come in handy. If you are, looking at a 70-200 and you don't have one and you want one, and the dollar amount makes sense to you, I do recommend this lens. This lens is incredible. It's fast, it's sharp, it has really pleasing bokeh. Let's talk about the things that maybe I don't like about the lens. I don't personally have a problem with this, but some people do. It zooms externally. Part of the reason they got it so small is because they made it zoom externally as opposed to internally like the older versions of these lenses. So why is that a disadvantage? Well, some people think that you can get dust inside these cracks, and then on the front element inside you'll see dust start to collect on there. I personally own other lenses that zoom externally, like my 24-105. So I've actually gone through some of these lenses and tested them out in really harsh environments. I personally have never experienced the dust that people speak of, but there are people out there who have actually complained about that. So maybe that's something to keep in mind. If you're looking to buy this lens, maybe you shoot on a beach a lot, maybe you're going and shooting out at white sands. It's never really been an issue for me. The lens does come with a lens collar, which is cool. I wish my 28-70 would come with a lens collar because it's way heavier than this lens. Yeah, I love the way it feels. The zoom ring is out front,
and the focus ring is back here. It's kind of awkward to get to the focus ring, to be honest. I don't do manual focus that often, but if you do manual focus, I don't know if you prefer to have the focus ring here, but if you don't, that may be something that drives you crazy. Another cool thing that I really like about this lens is that there's this really cool door right here on the lens hood. The reason why this is cool is you may put like a circular polarizing filter or something like that in here, and well, you can't really take your hand and try to turn a circular polarizing filter because you'll get in the way of your shot. So you can just take this while you're looking through your camera, and you can turn the circular polarizer or a variable ND filter, whatever, right here. One other massive thing that I dislike about this lens is that it's almost $3,000. To me, because it would be more of a want rather than a need, I'm probably not going to get it. As somebody who owns the 85 1.2, owns a 135 f2, owns a 100 2.8, I'm going to have a hard time justifying spending almost another $3,000 to cover focal lengths that I already cover with lenses that range from anywhere from equal to the maximum aperture to 2.5 times wider. I don't know if I can really justify owning this lens personally, but for some of you, this may be the only lens you need for portraits and events and photojournalism or sports, or well, maybe not sports. Some of you probably need like 400mm. But for all those other genres, this may be the only lens that you need. I should take the time right now to let you know that this episode was sponsored by the Camera Exchange. They have 2 locations. They have one in San Antonio. They have one in Austin. They are a mom and pop shop. They have a lot of things in stock that we're seeing supply shortages on. I went into the Camera Exchange today to get this lens. I saw R3s, I saw R7s, which I know some of you are waiting on those, and I saw the newly released R10, all in stock. I even saw R5Cs, the C70, lots of R5s, R5s with kits, EOS Rs with kits on rebates. So they have a very healthy inventory, and I know a lot of you go to the big box retailers. I totally understand. They have like credit cards and things like that, and it's just super convenient for some of you. But with the supply shortages as they are going on right now, perhaps you should look at a mom and pop shop to purchase your lens if you decide to get this or any other Canon products. It's always good to keep the little guy in business. So I do thank the Camera Exchange for their sponsorship of today's episode. I thank you all for watching today's episode. That was my review of the RF70-200 2.8. It's an incredible lens. I recommend you buy it if it's your bread and butter lens that you need. It is absolutely incredible. I'm not going to get one because I don't need it for my work. For my work, I find that the 135 f2 gives me better bokeh. It gives me better isolation. I do have to zoom with my feet though, but a 135 is typically the longest I like to go because any longer than that and I end up having to shout at my talent. But I'm a portrait photographer and I'm in controlled environments. If you're an event photographer, I think that the 70-200 is a no-brainer unless you own maybe one of the newer models of the EF version, and then it's a little bit more of a toss-up. It's really just convenience for the weight and the length. But that's my review today. If you like what you saw, click the subscribe button below. I appreciate your support. I've been using your comments as fuel for future episodes, and until I see you again, bye.